Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me, and I hope my slides will now show up. Oh, they do, right? So I'm going to be talking about Agile anti-patterns. So it's a delicate subject because, well, I might offend people. Who of you is a certified Scrum Master? Oh, good, that's only a few. That's good. So any of you a project manager, just to be sure? Anybody working for Microsoft? Oh no, that's tomorrow's talk. Sorry. So I'm going to be talking about Agile anti-patterns. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Sander. I don't pronounce my last name. It's horrible in English or in any other language than Dutch. So I am from the Netherlands. I work for this small company called Capgemini. We employ around 140,000 people around the world. People always ask me, do you know him or her? And I always say, no. That's the truth, right? So I'm a dad, I'm a programmer, I write, I speak. This is a very short introduction. This is my personal blog, lots of stuff in there. And my Twitter tag is in here, so that's me, right? So, and I've written a couple of books. So the English version of this book, This is Agile, my latest book, will be out in, I think, 1 or 2 weeks, hopefully, if we get it out into Amazon soon enough. So that's the introduction, right? So I started programming when I was age 13, which is a long time ago because I'm 47 now. So I've been doing this stuff for quite a while. And to be quite honest, with my name, I didn't have any other options in careers. So I had to be a programmer, right? So I've been doing that for all of my life, seen just about anything, witnessed a lot of waterfall and a lot of agile and a lot of in-betweens. So we started first with waterfall. And the thing about waterfall is, if you talk in an agile talk, is that the thing you have to say about it, that it should have never existed. Not because it's bad, it is bad, by the way, but because it just never should have existed. And I'll explain that to you. So the waterfall metaphor first came out from a white paper that was written by a guy called Winston Royce. And he was something like chief software, whatever, at Lockheed in the US. And he wrote the white paper called Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. Now, in this particular white paper, there is an image that you all know, and that's this image. You've seen this before, right? You're awfully shy. Yes, you've seen this before. This is the original waterfall picture. The thing is, with this picture, as we all know, it's flawed, right? It's a one-pass model, and one-pass models really don't work, especially when you do testing at the end, right? That's really, really expensive to do the testing only at the end. So we sort of moved away from this model over the past years. But the thing is, in this particular white paper, which is supposed to be the mother of all waterfall approaches, Winston Royce actually says, this is not a good approach. In 1970, right? So this white paper is way before Word came out. And the thing, I just learned this last year. The reason why it's a waterfall is because he couldn't place all the rectangles horizontally on the picture. That's how we ended up with the waterfall, right? So the thing with this waterfall picture is, he doesn't mention waterfall in the white paper, by the way, but this white paper was read by other people in the US, for instance, in the US Department of Defense, where they needed an approach for software development back in the 70s. And they saw this picture and they thought, well, this is a good thing to do. But the strange thing about this is they should have read the rest of the white paper, because right after this picture, he says, well, this is, of course, an approach that doesn't work. The next image in the same white paper is a far more interesting one, and it's actually this one. From an agile perspective, this looks much better, right? It actually says you have to be able to get back to the previous stage at any point in time. And there's even an interesting, it even says in the 1970s, like it says the iterative interaction. I don't know if you can all read that, but it says the iterative interaction, which is not a very waterfallish word, right? And he actually says something like this. He says, well, note that it is simply the entire process done in miniature. So that means all these steps, yes, those are the things we do in software development projects. But we should do it actually to a time scale that is relatively small with respect to the overall effort. He's actually describing small increments or iterations or whatever you might call them. Well, it's a bit different, but so he's actually already describing something agile-ish. Is that a good word in English? I don't know. Sounds good to me, but I'm Dutch, so I don't really know. So later on, something came out that was called Agile, right? And it's not a revolution, it's an evolution, right? We had things like unified process and the spiral model and lots of other approaches in the 90s that moved away from this single pass model into something more iterative. And the iterative rhythm became shorter and shorter until we ended up with something called Agile. Now, the thing about Agile is, I've been doing this for like, I don't know, what, 15, 70 years already. And the thing is, it is not a silver bullet. There is no way that any Agile approach out there, not even Scrum, well, I'm going to talk about Scrum a bit later, but not even Scrum, that will make your project succeed. It's you that make your project succeed, right? No matter what the approach is, whether it's XP or Scrum or DSDM or Kanban or Smart or whatever Agile approach out there you might have, it's you that does the work, right? It's the teams that do the work. It's not the process that will actually make you succeed. So Agile projects will fail as well. And it is my belief that they will fail in larger numbers over the next coming years. I'll try to explain that to you. So a while ago, I put up a tweet that said, I just witnessed a 10 million euro classical waterfall software development project fail miserably. What's your feedback? What do you think people said? What do you think? Well, you think nothing, of course, because it's early in the morning, I guess. Had you had your coffee yet, or your tea? What people said is, well, basically, they shouldn't have used waterfall, right? Waterfall is wrong, and it is. But, and also somebody said, well, does the name of the project coincidentally start with a C? I don't know why. So if you're in a project which name starts with a C, you're doomed. So the thing is that people say, well, they should have never done waterfall, right? Waterfall is wrong. So it's the methodology that doesn't work. And methodologies don't work at all, right? So what do you think about this tweet? So 2 weeks after that, I tweeted this. I said, well, I heard about a Scrum project that spent several million euros and didn't deliver anything. What do you think now people responded? They're doing it wrong, right? That's actually what I got back. They didn't apply Scrum right. And they did Scrum but. Yep. You can actually do that, I guess. So if you do waterfall and your project fails, it's the methodology that fails you. But if you do Agile or Scrum, it is not the methodology. You're not doing it right. Can you see the difference? And to be quite honest, I made up the first tweet. The second tweet is actually true. So there was a project that actually did not deliver anything at all to the client. Nothing, so it was really unsuccessful. And they spent lots of money. So I'm going to be bashing a bit about Scrum, but the thing is, yes, I'm all for Agile, and I'm all for Scrum, sort of, and other Agile approaches, et cetera, but I will be bashing a bit on Scrum. So the thing is, I think more and more Scrum projects will fail over the next coming years. And there are very simple reasons for that. And it all starts with this model. Have you seen this model before? Well, you have. Nobody? You're still quiet, right? This is the Youre model. It comes from, let's say, Japanese fighting sports. And it sort of describes 3 levels of learning stuff. And the first level is the most important one. It's where you learn the fundamentals, and you try to get them as automatic as possible. Have you seen the original Karate Kid movie? You're too young, probably, to have seen that, right? You've probably all seen the version with Will Smith's son in it. But I'm talking about the original one, right? Where this young guy tries to learn karate, goes to this old Japanese master, Mr. Miyagi, and he says, learn me karate. And Mr. Miyagi says, go and wash my car. Remember? So these are the basics, right? I always forget whether it's this way, or, well, let's pretend it's this way, right? Am I right or doing it the other way? Yeah, sure. It's wax on, wax off, right? And he has to do that all day. Why? Well, he doesn't understand why, but the reason for it is it has to be automatic. So you know what the next thing is he has to do? You haven't seen it, right? He has to paint the fence, right? It's this movement. And later on in the movie, you understand why he needs those movements, right? When it comes to the decisive fight in the film at the end, and he needs all this movement, and he has to make this really silly, I don't understand what that move is anyway, but he has to do that. So that's the basic level. And the thing is, at this point in time, the demand for certified Scrum Masters or professional Scrum Masters without the dash. I don't know why that is, but it is. And the demand for that is so big that we cannot meet up to that demand, right? So that's where a lot of new people come into the field. And we love new people in this field. So all these people are really being trained as a certified Scrum Master, right? So, and then you get emails like this. This is an original email that was written inside of my organization. So I anonymized the name, of course, but this is an original statement. It says, Jack states that we have 300 resources. So there was a big bank, I think it was in Belgium, that asked for 100 Scrum Masters. I don't know what they want to do with it, but anyway, so they needed 100 Scrum Masters, and they said, well, we have 300 resources who are trained as Scrum Master. So there's lots of things wrong with this sentence. First of all, I don't like the word resource. I think he meant people, not computers or chairs or tables or whatever. So I actually asked him, so do you actually mean people? And he said, yeah. And also, Scrum is not an acronym, right? So there's lots of stuff wrong with it. How can you have 300 certified Scrum Masters? Well, you can't have that. Actually, we train everybody in the company now to be a certified Scrum Master, even managers. Don't know what the use for that is, but anyway. So you can have all these people certified, but it's much harder to have experienced Scrum Masters, right? Because you need projects that they can actually learn about how to do Agile projects. And the thing is, we, in this particular field, have lowered our fences. So this is the move, right? Ralph Macchio makes in the Karate Kid. It's plain silly, but it seems to be working. And anyway, what we have done, so how many days of training does it take to become a certified Scrum Master? Do you know? 2, right? So you can become a certified Scrum Master in 2 days. Just 2 days of training and learning what's in the Scrum Guide. Do you know how many pages are in the Scrum Guide? 16. That's including the acknowledgments and stuff. 16 pages, that's the new Agile Bible, right? And so you can become a certified Scrum Master. It's a multiple choice exam. I think there are about 30 questions. You can do that in about 7 minutes if you've read the Scrum Guide, and you are a certified Scrum Master. I had 4 in my last project. They had never seen an Agile project before. And that's what's happening these days. We allow a lot of the people to move into this field without any experience, and then hoping that they will save our Agile projects, and they won't. So, when lowering our fences, a lot of other people enter this field. So I'm not hoping I'm offending anybody here, but I see these vendors that are now trying to sell Agile stuff, like Agile tools and dashboards and whatever you might have. Everything's Agile these days, right? And so I picked up an arbitrary one. So I removed the name of the company from here, but this is typically what you can do now. You can buy Agile tools. At least they'll tell you it's for free, but that's only for the first 60 days, right? So, and I'm not sure how we ever lived without it. Well, I did. I'm 47, right? So there's a lot of software that has been built in the world before Agile came out. And that software still works, right? So it's not all about you can only do software development properly if you do Agile. So it helps, but it's not all. And the second group that enters this field is maybe, personally I find that worse. It's what I call the Agile hippies. It's people who don't write code and are still allowed to move into our field, right? Sociologists, psychologists, people like that, they tend to take over this field because a lot of this stuff is actually really soft. And they tell you things like this. These are actual quotes, right? Just write down small things on small papers. It's your Kaizen. What? I haven't got a clue to what this means, right? And this is actually a statement coming from some guru at an Agile conference. Have you been to Agile conferences? I think they got worse and worse. They used to be about software development, about coding, about design patterns, about architecture. And now they're all about this fluffiness and, yeah, it's just not me. Because I just want to write code, right? I'm a developer. That's what I do. So go away with all this fluffy stuff. I don't like it. So I'll show you some quotes actually coming from Agile conferences. This is, I think personally this is horrible. I hope you can all read it. Like, make sure you don't miss the Agile elephant versus the waterfall elephant in the lobby. Or during this session, we are going to discuss the happiness index of projects. I am really sorry. This is just not my cup of tea, right? Add ready for celebration before done column on your Kanban board. Ready for celebration? I mean, life is a celebration, right? What's wrong with it? Why do we need this? Or stuff like this. This actually comes from a talk from a highly respected person in the Agile community. And he actually said, like, if your retrospectives don't add value to your project, you should change your retrospectives. Any one of us could come up with this, right? You could replace retrospective with just about anything in your life. So if your code doesn't add value to your project, you should change your code. What's the point in this, right? Who invents stuff like this? Or this? There's lots of these people out there I'll just read it to you. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, his name was here. I removed his name and his picture. So, invented several unique techniques. Influence mandalas, influence maps, supplication, exit and re-entry. I have a totally different visualization with that. Language of elegance, the interview. He invented the interview. Isn't that great? Cleans cereal box. But, okay, I think I made my point. And about Japanify, everything has to be in Japanese these days, right? So there's a technique called a Gemba walk, which basically means your manager comes up to your team and checks, well, how are you doing? Why does it have to be in Japanese? Couldn't it be in English or in Dutch or in German or whatever? That means in the language of your own country, that is. So I really don't like this stuff. So I have seen a lot of these Agile conferences, and if you look at these Agile conferences or unconferences these days, I don't feel at home anymore. It's like, it doesn't involve code anymore, right? It's not what I like. I feel like I'm at the wrong enactment, right? So the thing I think we should do as developers, well, you're probably too young for knowing this, right? There was apartheid once in South Africa, and artists stood up against that. I think we as programmers should do something like this, right? Stand up against the fluffiness in this field, because I really, really hate it. So, back to the Youre model. So, here's these 300 resources being trained as certified Scrum Master. They're moved into this bank to solve all of their Agile problems. And the thing is, because they're still at the Youre level, they just copy what they're taught, right? So if you do a 2-day training course in Scrum, you just copy what is said in that particular course. That's the way it works, right? If you do a 2-day C# course, for instance, you would just copy the techniques they learn you in that course. And you need to learn to think outside of that, right? And if you are able to do that, well, it takes a lot of experience to do that. Then you only reach the next level, right? And after that, you can transcend, which is, well, okay. I don't know what that means in writing code, but anyway. So the thing is, here you go into this project with your 2 days of training course, no experience at all, and they think you, as the Scrum Man, will solve all of their problems. And you will not be able to, because you don't have the experience. So what will happen is, you will try to do this in a very dogmatic way. That's what you see a lot these days in this field. I'll read out loud to you what it says, right? A dogma is an established belief or doctrine, Scrum, held by a religion, or it's the other way around, a religion like Scrum.org, or a particular group or organization. It is authoritative and not to be disputed, doubted, or diverged from by the practitioners or believers. And this is exactly what is happening now. It's everything that is not Scrum is said to be waterfall. So remember that, right? Everything that's not Scrum. So basically, everything that is not in the Scrum guide is waterfall, right? So what words do you think are not in the Scrum guide? I checked yesterday, by the way. There's lots of words not in the Scrum guide, like project management. Well, you can cheer about that or not. But there's other things not in the Scrum guide, like the word architecture does not appear in the Scrum guide. Just to give you an idea, what's all waterfall, right? So if you're doing use cases, for instance, you're doing waterfall. And basically, people still think that everything that happened in the waterfall era is wrong. Well, it's not. We've built a lot of software in the waterfall era that still runs. It might not meet our quality criteria, there might not be unit tests for it, but it still runs, right? So there you go into your project, trying to kill everything that is not within your track. not within your religion, right? It's everything that is not Scrum is wrong. So if you have different types of dashboards, Kanban boards or whatever, or you do things slightly different than what people think, they consider that wrong. There was a project in Belgium that I visited and that was failing miserably. And I talked to the project manager and I said, so what's happening? He said, well, the client, which was an atomic energy agency, did not want to accept the software. I said, why? He said, well, there's no acceptance criteria for it. So this is just common sense, right? I said, why not? He said, well, our Scrum Master said that you don't have acceptance criteria in Scrum. Then I said, well, show me your plan. And he said, well, I don't have a plan. So this project has been going on for 1.5 years, right? And he said, I don't have a plan. I said, why not? He said, well, the Scrum Master said, well, that's what I call Crusader Agile, right? And we should get away with that. So you cannot call this a stand-up meeting. It has to be named a Scrum, which is basically the same thing, right? And if you go into teams and you do this, you use this technique for the first time, they will probably approach it a bit like this, right? They're a bit shy and not daring to, and you have to get them away from their seats and stuff like that. And it's if you go to a conference, then what people say, if you do it like this, so everybody talks to whatever, the Scrum Master or the Agile coaches, this is what starting teams do, actually. They'll talk to you as the Scrum coach or the Agile coach or whatever you name it. And they said, well, no, it has to be like this. And if you're not able to do this, you might pass around a baton. Now, isn't that an interesting technique, right? This is what kindergarten Agile, right? It's not the way it's intended to be. It's intended to be free and applicable to your organization, right? Something like this. I had a dashboard up on one of my projects that looked like this. It's a bit more of a Kanban board. And then a certified Scrum Master, one of the gurus actually we had in the company, came up to me and he said, this is wrong. I said, no, it works. So it's not wrong. He said, well, you have to do it like that. This is a Scrum board. To tell you the truth, the word Scrum board does not appear in the Scrum guide. Scrum doesn't tell you how to do these dashboards. So if you have multiple stages, just to be able to visualize your process much better, that's okay. It's not wrong. So basically the thing is, there is no one-size-fits Agile. Certainly not Scrum. Scrum is a very, very limited approach. It doesn't think, I'm not saying it's wrong, because you can apply it to a lot of projects, but it's not good for all your projects. Not good for all organizations. As Capgemini, I work with very, very large organizations. They have different problems than saying, okay, we're going to do this project in 6 weeks and we're done, right? So let me see some of the differences. First of all, teams and roles. There's unsuccessful teams, like ours. Horrible at the Youre Championship. Anyway, so if you look at teams and you look at what different Agile approaches say about teams, it's very limited. So this is a basic picture of XP. Well, I know XP shouldn't be explained in pictures, but anyway, there's only 3 roles in there. There's customer, coach, and developer. It doesn't say anything about other roles maybe you have in your organization, like testers or analysts or architects or whatever you might have, or customers. Oh, there's customer, but different types of stakeholders you might have, like application management people. All those roles do not appear in these basic Agile approaches. And that is okay, unless you work for this large organization that has all these roles in place. And you need to find a way to deal with that. So Scrum again, Scrum talks about the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team. So what is the development team? So I looked it up in the Scrum guide, and they say, well, the development team consists of professionals who do the work of delivering a potentially releasable increment of done product at the end of each sprint. So it's basically all the people who do the work. So it's not the project manager, or the enterprise architect maybe, but well, sometimes. It's the people who do the work. And the thing is, Scrum recognizes no titles for development team members other than developer. I find that a very interesting one. So in my image, a developer is someone who writes code, right? But in Scrum, it says, well, testers, functional analysts, and all of the other roles in your project that actually help deliver stuff, they're also named developers. To me, that was kind of new. I don't really care whether that's valid or not. It's just everybody is a developer. So if your project manager actually does something on the project, he becomes a developer too. Isn't that cool? I love project managers who develop code. And also they say, well, fewer than 3 development team members decrease interaction and result in smaller productivity gains. And also, having more than 9 people requires too much coordination. 9 people, so you cannot do Scrum projects with over 9 people in your team. That's what it says, right? And usually, I have slightly bigger teams because I work for these organizations that still are organized in different departments for any one of the tasks in the waterfall model, right? So there's functional analysts, there's requirements people, there's developers, there's designers, there's testers, and there's people doing the application management afterwards. And you have to think about how to fit these people in. I'll give you an example project that I've been doing. So this was my team on that particular project. We had a product owner, yay. So it's Scrum. And we had 2 business analysts, 2 information analysts, an SAP CRM consultant. He was, by the way, the most expensive guy on the team. An SAP XI BPM middleware developers. We had 2 of them. And I don't know how to pronounce it. I usually pronounce it ABAP. It's a horrible programming language, by the way. It's really ugly. It's uglier than Visual Basic. So it's we had a UI developer, a .NET developer, Java developer, 2 testers, a Scrum Master, and me. So is this a typical Scrum team? Well, I don't really care, actually. And well, there's more than 9 people in it, lots more. And yes, we did have a bit more coordination, as the Scrum Guide says, but it worked. And if it works, you're fine, right? So this is not your typical team. If projects get larger, you run into a different risk, and that is that you split up the teams per discipline, right? You move away some of the development offshore or nearshore. See, they're farther away from the other. It's just an image. And a test team, and the enterprise architects, who usually are on a different floor in the same building as you are. They're usually on the top floor, and you're usually as developers in the basement or something. And they come by every now and then and see how you're doing. And the end users might be in a different building, et cetera, et cetera. So if you split it up into these different teams per discipline, you run the risk of running back into a waterfall mode. And you want to avoid that, actually, in projects. So what about these teams? Well, in my opinion, teams can be different depending on the task that you're doing, right? Of course, this being the most effective one. Well, not this one. I always get this melody in my head if I see this picture. Da, 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 da. Well, I guess I'm getting old, right? So what makes a team successful? Well, basically, in my opinion, there's 2 things. It's the way they collaborate, the way they communicate, the way they work together as a team, with all the different roles. So there's multidisciplinary teams usually. And there's also something to say about self-organization. So the Scrum Guide says teams are self-organized. So I don't really know what that means. Does that mean they don't need a project manager? Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If I have larger projects, I love having a project manager on board because he takes away, well, let's say, all the politics out of the team. And then other people say, yeah, well, that's the job of the Scrum Master. So if you look at the job of the Scrum Master and what he actually needs to be doing in the Scrum Guide, it's quite a lot. And I consider Scrum Masters to be good within my team and project managers to be better outside of the team because usually they know the organization much better than we do, right? So I'm not against Scrum Masters. You could say, well, I have this sort of relationship with Scrum Masters, but other than that, it's a good role. But inside the team and outside of the team, I would rather prefer a project manager. So I'm not, probably this is against your Agile feelings that I say, well, project managers can be okay in projects, but self-organization is hard to do, right? Teams are not always up to that, so you have to coach them into that. So then the next thing is, something I wonder a lot about is, where does your backlog come from? So how do you, if you do Agile, who of you is doing Agile projects, actually? That's only a few, right? That's like 20% or something. So the thing is, with Agile and Agile approaches is, you have this thing called a backlog. It's basically the things that you still need to do to finish your project, right? It's a list of stuff, and it has different names. For instance, in DSDM, it's called a prioritized requirements list. And in Scrum, it's called a product backlog, and there's different names for it, but it's basically the same thing. You can have a feature list and FDD or whatever. It's basically the same thing, but you have to wonder, where does it come from? And the thing is, well, Scrum doesn't help you in this. If you look at the basic pictures again of, let's say, XP and Scrum, you can see that XP actually starts with a customer writing down a bunch of user stories. So user stories actually come from XP, not from Scrum. These are basically these little index cards that you write these single sentences on. And I'll talk about it in a few seconds. But there's no process or a bit of a process or a little bit of approach to saying, how do you end up with these user stories? So they just come out of nowhere. It's just what's in the heads of your customers, right? And in Scrum, it's basically the same. Scrum has a product backlog. There is a product backlog when the project starts. Where it comes from, nobody knows, right? Just Ken, maybe. And so you have to think about how to get to this backlog. But if you look at other Agile approaches that are slightly more, that adds a bit of more ceremony to your project, they usually have things like 1 or 2 preliminary iterations. Like DSDM has a feasibility study and a business study. And at the end of your business study, you will have a prioritized requirements list. You will also have something like a baseline architecture or a project plan, actually, which it doesn't have to be really like this. It can be just a few pages, but still having a plan is not bad, right, for doing a project. So it has iterations like this. And there's more Agile approaches that have that. If you look at feature-driven development, FDD, they also say, well, you need to build up your feature list. And after you've done that, you can just move into the project. It doesn't mean, in none of these Agile approaches, that this feature list or your priorities requirements list is final or complete. It just says you have to get an idea about the size of this project, right? So it's still a project. It's not an ongoing thing. If that is the case, then you don't need a complete backlog. In my current project, which is a very, very big project, we don't bother getting the backlog complete because it's too big, right? It would cost us like half a year to complete all of the backlog items, just to find them. And then probably if we've done that, the world has changed, right? So we don't do that. But if you run a project, let's say of half a year or a year or 3 months or whatever, it might be a good idea to think about, well, how do you get to your backlog first before you start developing code? Okay, so there's another Agile approach that also has that. This is one called SMART, and it has 2 preliminary iterations, propose and scope. And it also, the thing is what these Agile approaches do is that they allow you to start your backlog here with stuff like, okay, we have to think about a baseline architecture. We have to think about setting up our development environment. We have to think about setting up the test environment. We have to think about who are our stakeholders, what are our goals, what are we trying to achieve, stuff like that, and then to move into a backlog and an estimate and a plan, and then go ahead and start developing code. So this is basically, let's say, the middle category of Agile approaches that have a bit more ceremony to it. And then there's documentation. Documentation is always a tough thing, right? Most people, if you go into documentation, will start doing user stories, as you are taught, right? It's not probably even in, I'm not a certified Scrum Master, so I really don't know where teaching user stories is in the training courses for certified Scrum Master, but people are doing user stories. And they'll debate you if you do something else. So we love doing these kinds of diagrams. It's basically use case diagrams, but there's other ways of dealing with your requirements as well. It doesn't always have to be these user stories. So when it comes to user stories, this is the basic format, right? You've all seen this, right? There's actually projects that write all of their requirements in these single sentence phrases, like, as a new customer, I want to register on the site so I can buy a product. And maybe you write something on the back, but these are just plain index cards, right? This is basically coming out of XP, and I've literally seen projects that have only got user stories as their documentation. Once I was at a project, and they said, well, we have this thing that we cannot hand over the software to application management. I said, why? They said, well, they don't accept our documentation. So I said, why? And they said, well, I'll show you. And they had this stack of index cards that they actually literally wanted to move over to the application management people. And they said, no way, this cannot be the documentation of your code or of your functionality or whatever it is. It's too limited. And user stories are too limited in many occasions. So I don't know if you can actually see this picture really good. This is an architectural landscape of one of my clients over the past years. This is, every rectangle in this picture is a system. So these are about, I don't know what, 30 systems in total. And this particular landscape is just the customer service department of this particular organization. So it's huge, right? This little pink rectangle is SAP CRM. So SAP, just to see the size of this landscape, we checked the size of the database on SAP CRM, just the number of tables in the database. And it was bigger than I thought it was. What do you think? So it's a big amount of tables. How many? 10,000. 10,000. 10,000 is quite a lot, right? It's more. I'll tell you, because you never guess. There were 142,000 tables in the database, right? So this is a bit about the size of this particular landscape. Every single business process they implemented went through at least 8 or 10 of these systems. So if you do that, and you think you can write that down on a single index card, you're just plain wrong, right? So they needed something more to do that, and index cards just don't work. And then people who are in favor of user stories, they always say like, okay, user stories are merely a way to get the conversation going. That's an easy way out. It's just saying, okay, we do this conversation, and after the conversation is done, we really don't know what to do. So I always ask the question, so what if the conversation ends? What do you do then? Usually people start writing code. So, and then Scrum, but I already show you this. I literally looked it up in the Scrum guide. I looked up the word user story. You would have expected that to appear in the Scrum guide. Well, at least according to Adobe Reader, not sure whether that's valid, but it says, has finished searching the document, no matches were found. So there's no user stories in Scrum. So there's no need to make them mandatory in your project. If there is other requirements techniques that work better for you, that is okay. Even if they come from a pre-Agile period in this field, right? So there's techniques that we had in the 70s for requirements that sort of worked. We had stuff like, well, let's call it use cases, or we talked in flowcharts or in whatever we used, but it worked, right? They got the requirements out. So it's not all bad that comes from that period. So I'm not defending waterfall, but I'm just saying it's not that, not everything that is not Scrum is waterfall. So if you look at documentation, if you look at the Agile Manifesto, you've all seen this, right? It says, working software over comprehensive documentation. To a lot of people in this field, they try to interpret this as, okay, we just have to write software and we don't have to document stuff. If that is your opinion, you're just wrong. There is no statement that says you don't do documentation. You can do you should do documentation. You should do just enough documentation. That is, by the way, very hard to achieve. What is just enough? So it doesn't say no documentation. So please, if you see people in the field that say, no, you don't have to document in a Scrum project, it's not true. Documentation is necessary in every project. Be it very little, sometimes be it very big, but you need documentation. One of the reasons is that your application that you're building will be out there for a whole bunch of years after you finish the project, right? So it will go into application maintenance for a long, long time. And if there is no documentation, because you're all laughing about this stack of user stories on index cards, but if you are in application management, I don't know if you are, then you'll have to maintain somebody else's shit usually for years and years and years. It would be a good thing, though, to have developers who write the code also have to maintain the code. I think that would improve the quality of our code a lot. So, then again, there is no one-size-fits-all Agile. So what do you have to do? Well, in my opinion, you have to find a way to do Agile that fits your organization, that exactly fits your needs in your project. And not just copying at the shoe level what some approach is saying, because a lot of these approaches are much smaller than your project is, right? So, especially if you go into bigger and bigger projects, and we're now moving a bit into, let's say, the enterprise field in Agile, right? You see enterprise Agile approaches coming out, like the Scrum.org, you can now download something called Agility Path, which is basically the Scrum guide copied with the word enterprise in front of just about anything. And there's stuff like SAFe, and there's other Agile approaches like Scrum, there's DoD, there's stuff that make Agile grow into the enterprise. I'm not really sure whether that is a good thing. I'm still doubting about it. But these lightweight Agile approaches do not apply very well in large organizations. They can apply, but you have to tweak them a bit. So the thing is, there is a lot of Agile approaches out there. And they start off at the bottom, like stuff like Crystal Clear by Alistair Corbett. It's tiny, right? And if you move up the scale, they add a bit of more ceremony to your project. Slightly bit more roles, slightly bit more deliverables, et cetera, et cetera. And that is not all wrong. So it could work if you're here, if you do Scrum or XP or the combination of that. And of Of course, the practices from XP are really, really good in any project. But it sometimes is necessary to move up the ladder a little bit. And the thing is, what you have to do is you have to try to assemble your agile approach for yourself. And it is different from in any project. So I've coached agile projects for the last 15 years. None of the approaches that we ended up with was the same as in a previous project. They are quite similar, but there's differences, basically due to the culture or the geography of the organization or the way management acts in this organization. My current client has a CEO he interferes with everything. He even decides on the data model. He's the CEO of an insurance company, right? He even tells us which elements in modeling techniques we can use and which we can't use. For a CEO of an insurance company, I think that's a strange way of acting. But anyway, so Agile at that organization is slightly a bit different than if I'm at a mobile operator doing a project, right? So it's different from in any organization, in any project. So the thing is, what I think you should do is look at the Agile ideas that are out there, the Agile principles, as you might call them, things like working in short iterations, independent of whether that's from Scrum or XP or Smart or DSDM or FDD or OpenUp or whatever you might have, except for Kanban, of course, which is slightly different. You work in short iterations. You work with collaborative teams, with different roles in the teams that work together to produce the product you're building. And every role that you need in there is good to go. For that, you need a small unit of work. Why a small unit of work? Well, it has to fit your iteration length, because you have to be able to reprioritize over and over again what you're doing, because that is what Agile is basically allows you to do, to change based on new insights. And that's very different than in Waterfall, right? It also says, well, you shouldn't have this fixed plan and try to stick to it for the rest of your lifetime. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in real life. So what Agile projects do, good Agile projects, independent of the approach they're following, is continuous planning. So they improve their plans basically on a daily or on a bi-weekly basis or on a weekly basis or whatever you might use as a cycle, but they improve on their planning based on the insights they have, based on the productivity they know that they have in their teams, right? And also what they do, what I think you should do is deliver until the very end. Not just in your test environment saying, okay, it's done, just move it all the way into, well, let's say at least a copy of your production environment. I had a project in Oslo in Norway. I talked to the project manager. He said, I said, how far are you down the road? And he said, well, we have 78 stories and we have 41 done. And they were halfway during the time. I got to the project because it was in trouble. And I said, okay, you're halfway your time. You've done 41 of 78. You're good. Sounds good. The day after, I talked to the test manager. And she said, so I asked her, did you actually complete 41 of these stories? And she said, well, we've tested 10 or 11 instead of 41, right? And then I was afraid to ask the next question, but I did. I said, so okay, how many of them passed the test? She said, 0. So basically, we went down in one day from halfway done to nothing done yet. And the difference in how they looked at the project was what the project manager, in all his ignorance, looked at the stories being done. If the developers, the coders, let's call it the coders then, if everyone is a developer, if the coder said the code was done, he considered that done. So in his definition of done, code done means, okay, work item done. That is not what it should be, right? And they couldn't test actually because after being, I think they were about a year underway, and they didn't even have set up a test environment. So the testers couldn't really test the code in their environment. No way did they bring it to an acceptance environment or a production environment. So they couldn't really see how much really was done. So set your definition of done really straight, right? And simplify your communication. Project managers with laptops full of spreadsheets, well, it's a bit out of fashion these days, right? So at least to say. So you should collaborate and you should assemble your Agile approach. So if you're doing a small project, the lightweight stuff is just enough. But if you're doing enterprise Agile, you probably need to add a little bit more stuff. Use different requirements, techniques, etc. Use different ways of estimation because you have to be able to compare stuff, etc., etc. And then, please don't do this. Agile is a learning thing, right? You have to be able to continue learning on a daily basis. So as soon as your organization puts out the Agile handbook, which my organization just did, you're doomed, right? Because it basically stops you from learning stuff. So I'll skip these ones because it's too funny. But anyway, so in retrospective, software development is hard, right? Really, really hard stuff. So we need to be good about this. We need to be able to adapt to any situation, not use it as a religion in Agile, but be able to use it on a sliding scale and change it according to your needs, right? So that's basically it. Assemble it, and then again, value is found in all of these Agile approaches, not just in the one you're following, and yes, even in Waterfall, there's still valid stuff in there. But can we please cut all this fluffiness and just go out and code? Okay, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference, and see you later. I'll be here all week to ask if you have any questions, and now it's up to Roy.